The piercing sound of emergency alarms filled every corner of the massive crystal palace that housed the Galactic Council. These weren't the usual meeting bells that called delegates to boring discussions about trade routes or mining rights. This was the sound that meant everything was about to end. Ambassador Veltron of the Zephyrian Republic stood at the center of the chamber, his blue skin pale with terror. His hands shook as he activated the holographic display that would show the assembled aliens something that would give them nightmares for years to come. The images that appeared made several delegates gasp and others cover their eyes completely. Entire planets were dying. Not from explosions or fires, but from something far worse. A gray, slimy substance was spreading across world after world. Like a disease, where it touched, everything simply melted away. Buildings that had stood for thousands of years turned to liquid in minutes. Forests that had grown for centuries became nothing but puddles of green slime. And the people, the billions of innocent people living on those worlds, were dying in the most horrible way imaginable. The hive of Kethmorin has broken every law. We hold sacred, Veltron said, his voice cracking with emotion. They've released bioweapons that we can't stop. 3 entire star systems are gone, just gone. In less than a week, over 30 billion people have died. The chamber erupted in panicked voices as delegates from dozens of different species began talking at once. Some were crying. Others were shouting angry demands for action. The crystalline beings from the Andor system were making high-pitched sounds that hurt everyone's ears. The plant-like creatures from Verdania were releasing spores that made the air thick and hard to breathe. Admiral Kreese of the aquatic Delphians rose from her water-filled seat, her 8 tentacles moving nervously around her head. She had commanded fleets for over 200 years and had never lost a major battle. But now, even this legendary warrior looked defeated and scared. "I've seen the reports from our military commanders," she announced, her voice carrying across the now quiet chamber. "Our greatest ships, our most advanced weapons, our bravest soldiers. Nothing works against these creatures. They have some kind of armor that changes and adapts to whatever we throw at them. Plasma cannons that can destroy asteroids barely scratch their skin. Energy weapons that can cut through solid metal do nothing to them." She paused, letting the horrible truth sink in. "In our last battle at the Proxima Defense Station, we sent in 50,000 of our finest warriors. Only 3,000 came back. The rest were dissolved by the Hive's weapons before they could even fire a shot." Silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in that room understood what this meant. The Galactic Council, which had kept peace for over 1,000 years, was facing something they couldn't defeat. Their technology, their weapons, their strategies, all of it was useless against this new enemy. Elder Morvac, the oldest and wisest member of the council, slowly stood up. His ancient body moved with difficulty, but his mind was still sharp. He had lived through wars, plagues, and disasters that most species had only heard about in history books. But even he had never seen anything like this. "There is one option left to us," he said quietly. "One that we swore we would never use. One that goes against everything we believe about civilized behavior." The chamber held its breath. Everyone knew what he was talking about, but no one wanted to say it out loud. "The Deathworld Protocol," Morvac continued. "We must contact Earth." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the delegates jumped to their feet in protest. Earth was quarantined for a reason. The humans who lived there were the most violent, dangerous creatures anyone had ever discovered. They were classified as Class 12 predators, the highest threat level possible. No civilized species was supposed to have any contact with them, but as the arguing continued, more reports came in. Another star system had fallen to the Hive, then another. The Grey Death was spreading faster than anyone had imagined. Finally, with heavy hearts and no other choice, the Council voted. The forbidden signal was sent out into the darkness of space, traveling toward a small blue and green planet where the galaxy's most feared predators lived.
Ow.
The message was simple and desperate. "Help us, please." Admiral Jake Thompson was enjoying his morning coffee when the strangest thing happened aboard the USS Vengeance. The communication officer, a young woman named Kelly Barnes, suddenly went completely silent at her station. Her face turned white as she stared at her screens, and her hands started shaking so badly she could barely operate her controls. "Admiral, sir," she called out in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "Oh, you need to see this immediately. We're receiving a transmission, but it's not from Earth Command or any human colony. It's coming from somewhere else entirely." Thompson set down his coffee and walked over to the main display screen. What he saw there made him blink several times to make sure he wasn't dreaming. Strange symbols and sounds filled the screen, clearly not made by human hands or voices. But somehow, the ship's computer was translating everything into perfect English. The message was a desperate cry for help from something called the Galactic Council. As Thompson listened, his expression grew more serious with each passing second. The aliens were describing an enemy that was consuming entire worlds with weapons that dissolved everything they touched. They had tried everything they could think of, but nothing worked. Their fleets were being destroyed, their people were dying, and they were completely out of options. Captain Tony Rodriguez, Thompson's second in command, stood beside him with his mouth hanging open. "Sir, are you hearing this correctly? These aliens are asking us for help, us? Species they've kept locked away from the rest of the galaxy because we're too dangerous?" Thompson nodded slowly. It was ironic, really. For decades, humanity had been treated like wild animals by the galactic community. They had been quarantined on Earth and its nearby colonies, forbidden from making contact with other intelligent species because humans were considered too violent and unpredictable. And now, those same aliens were begging for human help. "Bioweapons," Thompson said, reading the tactical data that came with the message. "These hive creatures are using some kind of biological warfare that dissolves organic and inorganic matter. The aliens say their conventional weapons are completely useless." Rodriguez shook his head in amazement. "Don't they realize that humans have been dealing with biological threats for thousands of years? We've survived plagues that killed millions, chemical weapons that could wipe out entire cities, and viruses that were specifically designed to target human DNA." The bridge crew began to gather around as more information came through. The aliens described their enemy in detail, and with each new piece of data, the humans became more confident. These hive creatures used tactics that would have been terrifying to species that evolved on peaceful worlds. But to humans, who came from a planet where everything was constantly trying to kill them, these tactics looked familiar. Dr. Rachel Kim, the fleet's chief medical officer, was already at her workstation, analyzing the biological signatures of the hive organisms. Her fingers flew across her keyboard as she compared the alien data to Earth's extensive database of biological threats. "This is incredible," she said, looking up from her screens with excitement. "These hive creatures have impressive adaptive abilities, but they show clear vulnerabilities to compounds we developed centuries ago. Their bioarmor might be able to adapt to energy weapons, but it's based on organic chemistry that follows the same basic rules as Earth biology." She pulled up a comparison chart that made everyone on the bridge smile. "Look at this. Their cellular structure is similar to the anthrax bacterium that we dealt with in the early 21st century. Their acid-based weapons use compounds that are almost identical to what we faced during the bioterror wars of 2087. We don't just know how to fight these things. We have weapons specifically designed for exactly this type of enemy." Thompson felt a grim satisfaction as he looked at the data. While the rest of the galaxy had spent centuries developing fancy energy shields and plasma weapons, humans had focused on the unglamorous but effective business of staying alive on a world that was constantly trying to kill them. They had perfected kinetic weapons that could punch through any armor, nuclear weapons that could sterilize entire areas, and most importantly, biological countermeasures that could stop any organic threat. "Prepare the fleet for immediate departure," Thompson ordered. "Send a message back to the Galactic Council. Tell them that Earth is responding to their distress call. And make sure our weapons are fully loaded. We're going to show the galaxy what happens when you mess with a species that survived the Deathworld." As the USS Vengeance and its escort ships began their journey toward the contested star systems, the crew felt something they hadn't experienced in years: purpose. Finally, humanity would have a chance to prove that their violent history and dangerous reputation weren't just flaws to be ashamed of, they were tools that could save the galaxy. When the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zarian system, what they saw made even the most hardened veterans pause in shock. The once beautiful system that had been home to over 2 billion Zephyrians was now a nightmare. The landscape of death and destruction, massive hive bioships, each one looking like a twisted combination of insect and fungus, were systematically consuming everything in their path. These weren't metal ships like humans built, but living creatures the size of city blocks that pulsed and breathed as they moved through space. Green acid clouds surrounded each vessel, dissolving anything that came too close. The few remaining Zephyrian defense stations were firing desperately at the hive ships. But their energy weapons simply bounced off the organic armor, or were absorbed completely. Admiral Thompson watched through his view screen as a Zephyrian cruiser tried to ram one of the bioships in a last desperate act of courage. The moment it touched the acid cloud, the metal hull began to smoke and bubble like ice cream and hot. "Water, my God," whispered Communications Officer Kelly Barnes. "How are we supposed to fight something like that?" But Commander Tom Wilson, leader of the fleet's marine assault teams, was studying the enemy ships with the cold eyes of a predator sizing up prey. While everyone else saw unstoppable monsters, Wilson saw targets with weaknesses that could be exploited. "It's those acid clouds," he said, pointing at the green mist surrounding each bioship. "They're designed to dissolve metal and energy shields. But look at the composition readings. It's basically concentrated stomach acid mixed with some kind of biological enzyme. We've dealt with worse stuff in the plague zones back home." Wilson's Marines were already suiting up in their combat armor, gear that had been tested against every biological threat Earth had ever produced. These weren't the sleek, lightweight suits that other species used. They were bulky, ugly, and designed for one purpose: keeping human soldiers live in environments that would kill anything else. The Zephyrian survivors who were monitoring human communications couldn't believe what they were hearing. The humans were actually planning to fly directly into the acid clouds that had destroyed dozens of their ships. "This is Admiral Thompson to all ships," came the announcement across the fleet. "We're going in hard and fast. Standard battle formation is useless here. We're going to ram right through their defenses and show these bugs what happens when they pick a fight with Earth." What happened next would be talked about in alien military academies for generations, instead of following the careful, methodical approach that galactic military doctrine recommended. The human ships accelerated directly toward the hive vessels at maximum speed. They didn't try to avoid the acid clouds or find safe approach vectors. They just charged straight through like ancient cavalry. The acid that had dissolved alien ships barely scratched the human hulls. Earth's ships were built to survive asteroid impacts, solar radiation, and the corrosive atmosphere of Venus. A little biological acid wasn't going to stop them. Commander Wilson's assault shuttle was the first to make contact. It punched through the acid clouds surrounding a hive bioship and slammed directly into what looked like a breathing opening on the creature's side. Before the hive organism could react, Wilson and his Marines were inside, moving through the organic corridors with practiced efficiency. The interior of the hive ship was like being inside a giant stomach. The walls pulsed and secreted fluids, and the air was thick with spores that would have killed most other species instantly. But Wilson's Marines had trained in the biowarfare facilities on Earth, where they regularly practiced fighting in environments contaminated with anthrax, plague, and genetically modified viruses. "Flame units forward," Wilson ordered as his team encountered the first hive defenders. These creatures looked like a cross between giant wasps and walking mushrooms, with claws that dripped acid and mandibles that could bite through steel. The Marines didn't hesitate. They had fought similar creatures in Earth's underground plague zones, where mutated insects and fungal growths had created their own deadly ecosystems. Flamethrowers roared to life, filling the organic corridors with cleansing fire. Chemical sprayers released compounds that had been developed to fight Earth's most dangerous biological weapons, the hive creatures. Used to facing prey that fled in terror from their bioweapons, suddenly found themselves up against predators who hunted them with cold, methodical precision. For every Marine that fell, 10 hive organisms died screaming. But the real turning point came when Lieutenant Amy Chen deployed humanity's secret weapon. Nanobotic swarms, microscopic robots programmed with centuries of Earth's biological warfare knowledge, were released into the ship's atmosphere. These tiny machines immediately began targeting the specific biological markers that kept the hive's adaptive armor functioning. "It's working," Chen reported over the comm system. "Their bioarmor is breaking down. The nanobots are attacking their cellular repair systems, just like we designed them to do against the Beijing plague." For the first time since the war began, hive ships started to retreat. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable were suddenly vulnerable, and they knew it. The victory at Zarian was just the beginning. Within hours of the first successful human assault, Admiral Thompson was receiving desperate messages from alien commanders across the galaxy. The hive had been stopped in one system, but they were still advancing in dozens of others. The difference was that now, for the first time, someone had actually figured out how to hurt them. Thompson set up his command center aboard the USS Vengeance, began coordinating what would become the largest military operation in galactic history. But this wasn't the kind of operation that other species were used to. While alien military doctrine focused on massive fleet battles and territorial control, humans approached warfare like the persistence hunters they had evolved to be. "We're not going to meet them in open battle," Thompson explained to his staff officers. "We're going to hunt them down, system by system, ship by ship, until there are none left. This isn't about territory anymore. This is about survival." The first thing that shocked the galactic observers was how quickly human medics began treating alien casualties. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the fleet's chief medical officer, set up field hospitals on every liberated world and was working around the clock to develop treatments for hive biotoxins. The alien physiology is different from humans, but the basic principles are the same. She explained to a group of Zephyrian doctors who were watching her work with amazement. These toxins work by breaking down cellular walls and disrupting nervous system function. We dealt with similar compounds during the Martian biocrisis of 2156. What the aliens didn't understand was that humans had spent centuries learning how to fight biological weapons because they had been forced to survive them. Earth's history was filled with plagues, pandemics, and biological warfare that would have wiped out most species. But each crisis had taught humanity something new about how to fight back. Dr. Hayes and her team were developing vaccines and treatments. Using techniques that seemed impossible to other species, they would take samples of hive toxins, analyze their molecular structure, and within days have working countermeasures ready for mass production. To the aliens, it looked like magic. To humans, it was just Tuesday. Meanwhile, Colonel Danny Brooks was leading special operations teams on a very different kind of mission. While the main fleet was fighting the hive's ships and armies, Brooks and his soldiers were hunting something far more important, the queens. Every hive cluster has a central command structure, Brooks explained to his team as they prepared for their next mission. Just like the ant colonies we studied back on Earth, you kill the queen and the whole system falls apart. Brooks spent years studying Earth's social insects, learning how termite colonies, ant hills, and wasp nests functioned. He understood that the hive wasn't just a military force. It was a biological machine with specific weak points that could be exploited. His teams moved through hive structures like ghosts, avoiding the main defensive forces and targeting the breeding chambers and command nodes. They used tactics that had been perfected fighting in Earth's underground tunnel systems, where human soldiers had learned to navigate complex three-dimensional battlefields against enemies that could be anywhere. The psychological impact on the hive was devastating. These creatures had conquered dozens of species by using fear as their primary weapon. They would arrive at a world, demonstrate their bioweapons, and watch as the population fled in terror. But humans didn't flee. They studied the enemy, figured out their weaknesses, and then hunted them down with mechanical precision, Dr. Ben Carter. The fleet's chief xenobiologist was the one who finally figured out why human tactics were so effective against the hive. After analyzing captured specimens and studying their behavior patterns, he made a discovery that changed everything. "They're not really individual creatures," he explained to Admiral Thompson during a strategy briefing. The entire hive is essentially one giant organism with billions of specialized parts. Each ship, each soldier, each bioweapon is connected to a central nervous system that coordinates everything. This revelation led to a completely new approach to fighting the hive. Instead of trying to destroy every ship and soldier, human forces began targeting the communication networks that held the organism together. They identified nerve clusters, breeding facilities, and coordination centers, and systematically destroyed them. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Hive forces that had been moving with perfect coordination suddenly became confused and disorganized. Ships that had fought with tactical brilliance began making basic mistakes. Entire fleets would suddenly stop in the middle of battle, as if they had forgotten what they were supposed to be doing. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity. For generations, other species had seen humans as dangerous primitives who were too violent to be trusted with advanced technology. Now they were watching as those same primitives saved civilization using tactics and knowledge that no other species possessed. The hive, accustomed to facing prey that ran away screaming, found themselves being hunted by apex predators who had learned their trade on the most dangerous planet in the known galaxy. And for the first time since the war began, it was the hive that was afraid. The final battle began at the edge of the Kethmoran system, where the hive had built their ultimate fortress. This wasn't just another conquered world. This was the birthplace of the creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for months. The planet itself was alive, covered in organic structures that pulsed and breathed like a single massive heart. Admiral Thompson stood on the bridge of the USS Vengeance, looking out at a sight that would have sent any other species running in terror. The hive homeworld was surrounded by thousands of bioships, each one larger and more dangerous than anything they had faced before. Clouds of toxic spores filled the space around the planet, and massive tentacles reached out from the surface, trying to grab any ship that came too close. "Sir, the alien commanders are requesting permission to retreat," reported Communications Officer Kelly Barnes. "They're saying this is suicide. No fleet has ever attempted to assault a fully developed hive world and survived." Thompson smiled grimly. "Tell them they're welcome to watch from a safe distance. We've got this." The alien observers didn't understand was that humans had been preparing for exactly this kind of battle their entire evolutionary history. While other species had developed on peaceful worlds with stable climates and friendly environments, Earth had spent millions of years trying to kill everything that lived on it. Humans had survived ice ages that froze most of the planet solid. They had lived through asteroid impacts that blocked out the sun for years. They had endured plagues that killed 9 out of every 10 people and still managed to rebuild civilization. Every disaster that should have wiped out humanity had instead made them stronger, smarter, more dangerous. General Kevin Murphy was leading the ground assault. He was actually excited about the challenge ahead. "Boys and girls," he announced to his troops over the communication system, "we're about to land on a planet where everything is designed to kill us. The air is poison, the ground is acidic, and every living thing wants to dissolve us into soup. In other words, it's just like home." The Marines laughed at their general's joke, but they weren't really joking. Earth had trained them for exactly this kind of environment. They had practiced fighting in the radioactive wastelands left over from ancient nuclear wars, the chemical-soaked battlefields where bioweapons had been tested, and the plague zones, where mutated organisms had created their own deadly ecosystems. The assault began with Admiral Thompson's fleet launching kinetic bombardment from orbit. These weren't the elegant energy weapons that other species preferred. They were simple, brutal chunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds, the same principle humans had been using to kill things since they first learned to throw rocks. Kinetic projectiles punched through the hive's organic defenses like bullets through tissue paper. Structures that could adapt to energy weapons and biological attacks had no defense against simple, overwhelming physical force. Entire sections of the planet's surface were cratered and burning within minutes. But the real test came when General Murphy's troops actually landed on the surface. The moment their boots touched the ground, the planet itself began attacking. The acid pools bubbled up from underground. Poisonous plants shot toxic darts at anyone who came near. and the very air was thick with spores designed to eat through any organic material. "Contact front," shouted Sergeant Lisa Chen as massive hive warriors emerged from underground tunnels. These weren't the smaller drones they had fought on the ships. These were the ultimate defenders, creatures the size of tanks, with armor that could deflect any weapon the galaxy had ever developed. But the humans had brought weapons that the galaxy had never seen before. Flamethrowers that burned at temperatures hot enough to melt steel, chemical weapons that could break down any organic compound, and most devastating of all, nuclear grenades that could sterilize entire areas in seconds. The battle raged for hours as human forces pushed deeper into the hive structures, systematically destroying everything they found. They moved with the methodical efficiency of exterminators, showing no fear and taking no prisoners. The turning point came when Colonel Janet Foster's Special Forces team located the central breeding chamber where the ultimate hive queen was hidden. This creature was the size of a building, with thousands of tentacles and defensive systems that had been developing for centuries. "This is it," Foster reported over the communication system. "The source of everything. Take this out, and the whole hive collective dies." The battle for the Queen's Chamber was the most intense fighting of the entire war. But humans had one advantage that no other species possessed. They were used to fighting things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than they were. Earth had taught them that size and strength meant nothing compared to intelligence, determination, and the willingness to do whatever it took to survive. When the last hive queen finally died, the effect was immediate. Across the galaxy, every hive ship, every bioweapon, every organic structure simply stopped functioning. The collective mind that had controlled billions of organisms was gone, and without it, they were nothing more than lifeless tissue. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within hours. The debate was short, and the vote was unanimous. Humanity's quarantine status would be lifted immediately. They would be reclassified as protected allies, too dangerous to threaten, too valuable to lose. Admiral Thompson's final message to the galaxy was simple. "You called us Deathworlders, like it was something to be ashamed of. We prefer to think of it as job training. Earth didn't make us weak. It made us the toughest species in the galaxy. And anyone who threatens our friends is going to learn that the hard way." The galaxy had learned an important lesson: to never underestimate. The species that looked at the most dangerous planet in known space and decided to call it home